I want to talk about something I've been itching to talk about for a while now on the channel, and that is why people like extreme metal. And the two main ones we're going to be talking about today, just to make it kind of like simple, because it's kind of the same explanation really for all forms of music, even no matter how jarring. Is we're just going to use for two examples really. The most of the main subgenres of metal, the two most extreme ones that everyone seems to have a problem getting into. We're going to be talking about death metal and black metal now. The point of this video is to probably state the obvious to people that already like those genres like me. But also I'm going to kind of explain sort of the reason why I got into the two forms of these extreme forms of music, and pretty much why most people like them anyways, to provide insight onto people why they might not like it yet, or why they should like it, what they need to listen for. Because if we're going to be honest with ourselves, the first thing we talk about is that you need to develop an ear for the type of music. Now, it was easier for me to get into like metal and stuff like that because I'd been for all my life listening to rock. That was kind of my appeal, was stuff like that. I didn't really care too much for like pop music. But if someone's growing up listening to pop music, that's going to be, what they listen to, or country. Pretty much all country is going to come naturally to them, no matter what. Even though I don't like any country, it's because I didn't grow up with it at all. But that can always change because, say, I get into like Johnny Cash, which I do like some classic Johnny Cash. But if I keep listening to that and then getting further into country, I might even eventually like some of that terrible country pop music we hear on the radio. Stuff like that. It's developing the ear for that type of music and kind of slowly building the blocks to it. And what I mean by because I've just explained developing kind of the building blocks to that type of music, but developing an ear for music, like I said, kind of comes maybe earlier in your stages of life where you need to hear certain types of music at certain points to become interested in it, probably. Maybe even points of being depressed. You're probably gonna. That's why a lot of people flock to metalcore and shit like that, and emo stuff like that, because kind of identify with it. But you develop an ear for that type of whatever type of music you're trying to get into over time. It's not something that comes naturally. You have to be able to hear the appeal of it. What do I mean by that? Well, a lot of us metalheads, we're not going to like rap, of course, because it's very, very different. It's a whole set of genre, like a set of music, and it's very popular right now. So we all hate rap and dismiss it. But of course, a lot of people that like rap, they're going to hear something we don't hear. They're going to, hear probably really kick-ass grooves. They're going to, a lot of it we'll just listen to and it's this is just a fucking clusterfuck of noise. But through that clusterfuck of noise, like trap beats and shit like that, they can hear badass grooves, badass beats. They can get really into that, stuff you can dance to. They think it's really kick-ass. Or the lyrics, they identify with it easier. Or they think that even rapping style through the vocals is pretty unique or something like that. Something we don't hear. I personally think someone like Lil Wayne is going to sound like absolute ass, but someone might be like, wow, that's such a unique way of doing, rapping. It's such a unique voice. And he does have a pretty unique voice, because you don't really hear too many rappers that sound, terrible like he does. But to a lot of people, it's he's basically, to the metal equivalent, someone like King Diamond is definitely going to sound absolutely atrocious. But once you kind of get into that and develop that ear for his, vocal style, it's actually pretty technically good with the music. He's not off key or anything. He's just extremely falsetto oriented vocalist, and he utilizes it very well. So you always need to develop an ear for it. So to get into extreme metal, you need to build the stepping stones to be able to develop an ear for it. Now, it'll be a lot easier for me to explain black metal because that was much more recent, kind of how I got into black metal. But with death metal, how I kind of built the stepping stones and how maybe a lot of you could build those stepping stones. I'll say this, I built them wrong. I made my way to death metal wrong, and even when I liked some death metal, I still had a problem with death metal as a whole, like real death metal. Even something like Bolt Thrower. Um, I got into death metal through the band Death, and I thought, death metal was supposed to be something like their last album, The Sound of Perseverance. But if we're going to be honest with ourselves, that album's not death metal, like at all. It doesn't have any of the tenets of death metal whatsoever. But if, but the thing is also is that band also kind of helped me over time because the rest of their stuff is pretty much death metal, and I liked their later stuff a lot more early on. Then I slowly kind of started to drift towards stuff like Spiritual Healing, Leprosy, because that's easily a very easy gateway to death metal. Before you can even get to that, I'd recommend, say if you're like into prog and you don't really like anything else other than that, it's going to be a while before you get into something like death metal. I'll say that right now. You need to build those building blocks. First, you're going to need to get into heavy metal, something like Judas Priest or Iron Maiden. Then go into thrash, something like Metallica, and then build from there to Megadeth, and then build from there to Slayer. Now, Slayer's like the catalyst to extreme metal. Once you get Slayer, then it's much easier to understand the riff style, like the heavy riff style of something like death metal or even black metal. But I would argue Slayer is actually much more of a catalyst to death metal than fucking black metal. Most people would agree with that. Bathory is much more the catalyst to black metal. We'll talk about that in a second. But something like Rain and Blood by Slayer, or even Hell Awaits, those like first 5 albums, mostly the first 3, are going to be those building blocks of death metal. The very simplistic writing, but very, very fast and aggressive vocals. Once you kind of develop the ear for that, it should be much easier. And, with developing the ear for Slayer, it's actually kind of not that difficult, because once you get into the first album, which is easier to get into because it's kind of a new wave of British heavy metal sound. So if you're already into like Metallica, Megadeth, or even Iron Maiden or Judas Priest at that point, getting into Show No Mercy, the first album, is really fucking easy. And then from there, it's like, Hell Awaits is going to be a little bit darker, more progressive, kind of weird. And then from there, once you get into that like heavy style, Rain and Blood, which you would have if you were just a prog guy, because a lot of prog people hate fucking Rain and Blood, that's going to be much more easier to get now. Now you understand that album. Now you kind of are interested to figure out that album. And the album is very fast, simplistic, very meat and potatoes, nothing else. Shit. There goes the there goes the camera for a second. What was I talking about? So then from there, of course, I got into death. It was much easier to get into death at that point, but I still was getting into the wrong type of death metal. But then I started, like I said, drift towards stuff like the first 3 albums. Then I kind of started to like the early death metal scene, which is easily the easiest death metal to get into. If you just jump into something like Nile, which is just blasturbation death metal with like really loud production, you're gonna be like, fuck, this is total noise. And unless you develop the ear for it, it's gonna be total fucking noise. And for the most part, it actually kind of is total fucking noise, but we'll get to that in a second. The early Florida death metal scene, stuff like early Obituary and Death, and stuff like, even like Cancer, or even on the other end of the fucking United States, you have Possessed. That type of stuff is sort of thrashy, like thrash riffs thrown in a death metal style, so the production's much more dark, the vocals are a little bit more harsh, the riffs are a little more simplistic, but if you already got into something like Rain and Blood at this time, it's easier to get. Now the appeal to this, of going a little heavier with the thrash sound, is the appeal is that, if you're going to sing, let's use fucking Cannibal Corpse for example, and why that's appealing. And when you build those stepping stones to like something like them, it's easy to get. The riffs are pretty thrashy, and they're pretty extreme thrashy, but they take it a step further because their lyrical themes, their themes as a band, are much more extreme. They're very much about like horror movies, gore, zombies, stuff like that. If you're gonna sing about like a guy that kills his whole family with a chainsaw. You're not going to have someone like King Diamond on vocals. It just sounds wrong. You're not going to have more simplistic drums. You have to have drums that convey that feel of just absolute lunacy and chaos. So you have blast beats thrown in there, which are a big reason why death metal or even black metal sounds like noise to people. It's not even just the vocals, it's the drums. And the drums in death metal and black metal are fucking crazy because they're doing blast beats, which are at like 1,000 miles an hour. So I explained that, and then the vocals, of course, are going to be much more gruff. A lot of people do different styles. It's a little harder to kind of defend someone like Chris Barnes that just get really, really low. That's just kind of him experimenting with a different style. But the whole appeal of doing death metal vocals is to sound more evil. And for death metal, that's a very good vocal style mix with that. Because death metal is much more low. It's much more heavy, unlike the lower end of the spectrum. Or something like black metal is going to sound more trebly, more dank. So they have like high vocalists. So the reason why they have like screamers and like black metal, or not really screamers, but like higher register gutturals and then like lower register gutturals in death metal, is that black metal is much more trebly, high end with lo-fi production. So it's going to sound kind of like a high pitched mess. You got to have high pitched vocals. Go with that. And then death metal is going to sound very low, very heavy. You got to have heavy, low vocals go with that. It's about complementing the music, and the vocals very much complement that style of music. Now, the riffs of death metal, they evolved a lot. The early Florida scene of death metal was kind of thrashy, like I said already. But they took that a little crazier and crazier and crazier, faster, faster, and faster. And then you get to something like dissonant riffing. The idea of dissonant riffing, which is mixing a little bit of avant-garde, off-time approaches to death metal, not necessarily progressive, but more so avant-garde, is to make the music sound kind of like, well, it's falling off, or like you're on a roller coaster, right? And you're going down this is the best explanation I've heard to describe it before. I think it was Maidslave said this or something like that. You're going down a roller coaster and your like lock-in seat thing is like getting loose. You're like, oh fuck, I'm about to fall out of this. That's the dissonant riff. It sounds off time really fast. You're like, holy fucking shit, it sounds so crazy and random and like a little off time. But then once you get back down up the roller coaster, then it's like, oh, well, at least I'm safe for now. And that's going from a crazy off-kiltered riff that's very unique and really puts you on the edge of your seat. And then it's put back into something that has a groove to it, that has a catchy melody to it, more so a thrashy, easy to get into riff. So it kind of saves the day, and then it keeps going through that motion. I, however, would, the counterpoint to that, I would argue something like Obscura, that album Obscura, which is nothing but just dissonant random riffing, is a piece of shit because there's no appeal to that, I think. But I'm not into that. But maybe someone can explain why other people are into that. So I find the appeal to death metal, but I could do a much better explanation here for black metal. Now, my stepping stones to black metal were the band Bathory. I had a very hard time getting into black metal in general. I thought it was kind of a stupid idea. I didn't really care for it. A lot of black metal that I seemed to have found at the time was something like Birdsum, where it was just 10-minute songs of repetition and garbage. But Bathory was much more thrashy, kind of like Slayer was, but Slayer was taking it a little more extreme. Bathory did the same thing. With those first couple albums, they're pretty thrashy, but they're thrown in some weird elements that would turn into black metal. In that first album, they experiment with the lo-fi sound that become, important to black metal, along with the tremolo picking. You have death metal with the dissonant riffing and the weird riff stuff like that. I think they're called atonal patterns. I don't know what the fuck. I'm not that knowledgeable in death metal. I'll say that right now. I'm just kind of explaining the appeal, but I could do a much better job with black metal here. You have tremolo picking, right? and that was kind of starting to experiment on that album. It was thrash with a tinge of what would become black metal. Then you have the album The Return, which does much more typical thrash. The riffs aren't as tremolo picked, and the it's not even really as fast at points, and the production is a little better. However, what they throw on that album is the dark, dark, dark atmosphere that would become important on any single black album, a black metal album, is the atmosphere. Everything has atmosphere to it, even death metal. And that had like the cold atmosphere, which is the point of black metal. We'll talk more about that in a second. But they also had on that album kind of off-kiltered riffs, which were popularized by stuff like Venom, which were like off-tuned, off-timing. And so it was kind of rough off the cuff, kind of more so a punk style thing. They were getting a lot of inspiration from punk as well. Then comes Under the Sign of the Black Mark, which I consider probably the first full-on black metal album. Because even though some of the songs are a little slower, they mixed everything. You have the low, cold atmosphere that sounds like either you're in hell or you're in winter. So you have that low, cold, dark atmosphere from Return. You have the off-time, off-kilter riff style from The Return as well. You have the lo-fi sound of the first album, and you have the tremolo picking of the first album, but mix that in with the speed of the first album, and then take it even further with the blast beats, which are done on some songs like Massacre and Chariots of Fire. You have the very first black metal album. And then even taking it a step further, because black metal likes to mix a lot with like folk music sometimes, or like do really slow epic songs that are kind of repetitious. And you have that with the song Into the Eternal Fire. That song is the epitome of a black metal epic song. So what's the appeal of it? Why did I all of a sudden, when I heard that album specifically, I finally, not only was I like, wow, this is really fucking good, surprisingly, but all of a sudden I was like, I have to hear more black metal, and then all of a sudden everything else made sense. It's because that album had much more, and those early Bathory albums have much more of a thrashy atmosphere to them. But I realized something on that album, which was the whole appeal of black metal. Now, all these guys that do black metal for the most part tend to be moody individuals. So it's very easy to see that most black metal bands, or all the ones that are considered true, are very, very, very into their craft and are very, very inspired to write this type of music because of doing it more so as like an art form. Like they really need to express themselves because they grew up in like Scandinavia and it's very cold, very boring, kind of shitty there. So a lot of them have like really depressing lives. Someone like Korthon was, all these people, Korthon, fucking Fenrez, Varg, Euronymous, Dead, all these people were depressed individuals, so they were drawn to extreme pain and extreme emotion to get out their true feelings, because they're like cynical fucking introverts that are bottling up all their feelings. However, a lot of the time they also mix in emotion with it, not just hateful aggression, but they're using the hateful aggression to get out a message a lot of the time. And a lot of black metal bands you're going to hear, once you develop an ear for it, you're going to hear melodies. Good example for this is something like Dark Throne's Transylvanian Hunger, or Bertsam's If the Light Takes Us. Those two albums especially have, within the realms of these tremolo picking and fucking chaos that sounds like a goddamn blender and a blizzard, you hear dark gothic melodies, simplistic melodies even, but you hear a bit of melody, and then it coincides with the extreme vocals. It conveys a little bit more of an emotion. It kind of gives that extreme delivery while also actually conveying music that's beautiful. A lot of people I've heard say, including myself, I still feel like this. You could literally fall asleep to something like Transylvanian Hunger, even though it's pretty extreme, because the melodies are very catchy and beautiful. It basically sounds like if you were to take something like classical music, without the crazy progression to it, but just like the melodies, and then with tremolo picking and blast beats with the lo-fi sound, it makes it sound like it's all muddled, like it's surrounded by snow, it's trapped in a blizzard. Kind of like their feelings are trapped, you know? But within that blizzard, and within that blender that they threw in the fucking music, the music's still there. In its full glory. All that melody, it's not fully destroyed. It's still there. But it's delivered with intense energy, excitement, that if you were to just play that normal melody, it wouldn't be nearly as interesting. Just for an example, there's this song off Panzerfaust. I can't remember the name of the first song, since some fucking weird Norwegian talk, but the melody is basically da 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 da, but then you have the fucking tremolo picking in there, the blast beats and all that stuff. So it sounds like so if you gotta like pay attention for that with all the lo-fi shit. Basically, it sounds like the emotional music and melody from someone, you know, trapped in a blizzard, because that's how they were in Scandinavia. I can't really necessarily speak the same thing for like every other black metal band that doesn't do the exact same thing, but a lot of them do that type of thing. And it's not necessarily that, like, for instance, someone like the guy from Leviathan obviously lives in the United States, and he's not trapped in a blizzard like 24/7 like these people in fucking Scandinavia. But for them, it's like, wow, this makes sense to me. This is a way to convey my extreme emotions and like, but give my deep personal shit without it sounding fucking gay. That's the way that they do it. You know, it means a lot more to them to do it in that style. And that's the ultimate thing with extreme music. It's not a cash grab most of the time. Some bands that are usually considered untrue, especially within the black metal realms, are doing it kind of more so for attention and a paycheck, and they kind of avoid the entire point of black metal and even death metal if they're doing the same thing over here. They're avoiding the entire point of it. That's why something like The Sound of Perseverance is in death metal, because it avoided the entire fucking point of death metal to do something different. That's not necessarily bad all the time either, but I'm more so just trying to explain like the basic forms of extreme music, why it's, you know, enticing to people. Why I found myself especially loving black metal over here, because it makes so much sense once you really develop that ear for it. Now that you know it's kind of a lot of the time just a melody thrown in a blizzard or in like a blender to make, you know, you say if you just have ice cream, right? Well, you could just eat the ice cream, or you could throw that ice cream in the blender and you have something that's much more exciting, you know? And most people agree that like a shake is much more exciting than a fucking thing of ice cream, you know? It's the same thing, but more exciting. But it's also a little bit different because, of course, you're not going to hear 24/7 melodies. You're going to hear, you know, crazy thrash riffs or crazy punk riffs. So a lot of these bands are also inspired by hardcore punk, thrash metal, even heavy metal. So they or even a lot of the time folk music. They throw those riffs and melodies into that blender and you get the same results. So you take thrash in that blender, and those riffs, you know, are going to be a little bit more exciting now. They're a little bit more chaotic. Now, instead of having white on black with, you know, black metal where it's delivering a white, beautiful melody through extreme black emotion, now you're delivering black, chaotic riffs through extreme black delivery. You know what I'm saying? So then you have stuff like A Blaze in the Northern Sky. stuff that's just fucking chaos all the way through. Stuff like Under a Funeral Moon. Both those albums by Darkthrone. Those, Darkthrone and Bathory, I find, are probably the easiest gateway bands to stuff like this. Even Immortal as well. And they experimented, very obviously experimented with thrash. Those first two albums, the first one was inspired directly by stuff like Bathory, and they took very atmospheric, creepy thrash, and then threw it in the blender. And it sounds very, 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 very cold, very dark now. So it's more dark on dark stuff. Same thing with, almost said Poser Holocaust. What's it called? Pure Holocaust. There we go. That album is like a great example of a band fusing black on black, because then it's the most extreme they can fucking deliver music, And then even on the third album that they did, what's that one called? The Blizzard Beast is the fourth one, and that one was like total thrash riffs. It's total simplicity. It's almost like Rain and Blood with a cold black metal atmosphere to it. So that's a good example. I can't remember the name of the third album at the moment, but not Blizzard Beasts, god damn it. But Battles in the North. It's all off time and shit too. It's a little off kilter. The drumming is weird. But the appeal to that as well is that that's one of the most, of all black metal albums, that is like the one that sounds like a Blizzard. Because it's trying to throw that riff off course with like the Blizzard ones being so fucking fierce. It's trying to blow you off that mountain. That's the appeal to it. Maybe in their life at that time, they were feeling like they were, like, as hard as they were trying to do stuff, it was just not working out. People were trying to keep them down. Or, the Abath's just a shitty drummer. But, it's very relatable through that way. It's basically trying to throw things off kilter, but still retaining the original idea of the song, but making it more extreme. A little bit interesting, extremely unique, though. The delivery is completely different. The delivery is very jarring. The delivery is extremely in your face. But the essential music in death metal, and black metal, and thrash metal, and heavy metal, in country, in jazz, and rap, the essential music, melody, and just the music is the exact same. What's different and unique is the delivery. And to like that delivery, you have to develop the ear for it. And to develop that ear for it, you need to get those building blocks to get there. I hope this was informative, and I hope it wasn't too confusing for you guys. And I hope maybe you will get into stuff like black and death metal. Thank you.